So I think we might make a start. For those who don't know me, I'm Susan Coote. I'm the Exercise and Physio Coordinator with MS Ireland. I'm delighted to be holding hosting a physio and exercise related webinar. I'm particularly looking forward to hearing what Gilly has to say. She's here in Ireland to do 2 courses for our physio colleagues. So she was in Galway on Monday. She's going to be in Dublin on Friday. I'm looking forward to taking part on Friday. So welcome, Gilly. It's
Thank you.
really wonderful to have you in Ireland, and thank you for taking the time out of your week to do this webinar for us. I'm just going to introduce Gilly briefly and then hand over and let her do her presentation. So Gilly works a full clinical caseload as a senior neurophysio at Rope Neuro Rehab in Auckland, New Zealand. She's the founder and director of MS Get a Head Start, and she ran her own neuro clinic, Connect Neurophysio, for 6 years. She graduated in the UK in 2004 and worked in both public and private healthcare settings in the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. She was awarded the Australian Physio Association Special Commendation for Achievement in Neurophysio in 2015. So well done on that. And in 2016, she was awarded an honorary clinical fellowship for the Australian Catholic University. Gilly has just completed her master's at AUT on the online delivery of MS Get a Head Start. So we're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say, Gilly. I'll let you share your presentation and kick off the webinar.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Susan and MS Ireland for inviting me to give this talk. I am extremely passionate about exercise and MS. And as I've just done that, I'm just going to make sure that Susan can give me a thumbs up that PowerPoint is all there and obviously everyone can hear me
Yes, all
well.
good. All good.
Fabulous, thank you. So to say, it's always such an amazing opportunity to, yeah, be given this opportunity to present. And I have about just over a week here in Ireland. I have been here once before, but it was many years ago. I have to say, I'm absolutely loving it. So, hopefully, I'll get invited back because it's beautiful. There's definitely some similarities with New Zealand. So, let's say I live in New Zealand now and have done for the last 20 years. Um, MS and Excess, as I said, I'm a neurological physio. I treat hands-on. I've done, a little bit in the research world recently with my master's, but I very much, what I'm bringing you today is about what is clinical, what is practical, what you can do from home, and where the evidence sits, because sometimes understanding the evidence and how that works in your actual day-to-day life of living with MS can be quite hard to understand. So I'm hoping on this journey that I'm going to take you on today, that will make some things really clear.
And I've just realized I didn't do my one bit of housekeeping that I was delegated, which is to let people know that and there will be time for Q&A at the end. So if you wiggle your mouse on your Zoom screen, you'll see a Q&A box there. So if you click on that, you can type in your questions and then I'll read them out for Gilly at the end. So thank you, Gilly.
Thank you, Susan. All right, I'm just going to make sure, I said that I have got a screen. There we go. Make sure I can advance. So what I'm really going to hone in on today, which I think is so exciting, and this is something that hopefully you guys will join me on. And it's probably not necessarily difficult for you at the moment living with MS, but the time of living with MS at the moment is a really exciting time because there's never been so much more hope than what there had been previously. So what we do know now through evidence is that exercise is disease modifying for MS, which is amazing that we can help prove that and show that. Now, when I say disease modifying, unfortunately, I'm not saying that we can stop or cure the MS, but it has been shown that exercise can slow the progression down and really alter the trajectory of MS. You're coupling that evidence about exercise alongside all these new great kind of disease modifying therapies that I truly believe what we're going to see as the journey with MS from now onwards is going to be something very different than unfortunately people may have had to endure in the past. So it is a really exciting time. But it doesn't matter where you are in that trajectory of MS, even if you're there and you've had MS for the last 20, 30 years, you still have the potential to get some really huge benefits from exercise. So it's really powerful that we now have research to support how amazing exercise is. So I'm going to cover a little bit of that today, where some of that research has come from and what does it mean, but also cover some of the barriers because I'm sure lots of you are like, oh yeah, we all know that exercise is great to do, but like it's exceptionally hard when you have something like MS. There's not really any other neurological conditions out there where you have fundamental things that change how you can cope with exercise. So that is your heat sensitivity and your neuromuscular fatigue. So I'm going to explain what they are and also with some evidence, what are the best ways to actually live with them and still be able to exercise. And also, like, as I said, we all know exercise is good, but it can be challenging to know what you need to do for your MS. So I'm going to really cover about those essential changes you need to make to ensure that you are successful in getting exercise and the outcomes that you want. So that's what we're going to cover today. So, rehab works. Now, this is really some amazing stats that there is more evidence on the benefits of exercise for MS than any other neurological condition. So that's amazing. However, up to only about 2 or 3 years ago, the stats were that 80% of people living with MS were not meeting the recommended guidelines of exercise at all. So, and those figures have slightly changed, but we're still really looking at about 60 to 70% of people living with MS are not meeting the recommended guidelines. We have all this amazing published evidence, but in reality, living with MS and how you successfully get to these exercise quantities and goals is really tricky. So that's what we'll cover today. But there is lots of evidence. We know that exercise can promote what we call neuroplasticity, so that these are the big words, the neurogenesis, neuroprotection, connectomics, and remyelination. And that word, remyelination, is actually something really, inspiring and a foundational word that a lot of people with MS will know is if we can help remyelinate some of that nervous system, that is going to help with how you function and live day to day. And obviously, there's lots of drug trials at the moment looking at remyelination, but what we do know with drugs is that they have side effects. And I can guarantee you all the side effects of exercise are beneficial. What's also really good to understand about exercise and MS is that exercise does reduce your relapse rate. It does not increase your risk. I'll talk about some of the issues that some people might have had when exercising that almost feels like a relapse. We call it a symptom exacerbation, but it's not technically a relapse. So we know that exercise actually reduces it. But also vigorous physical activity, so exercise can actually reduce your risk of developing MS. So, if you have MS and you have family members and children and stuff, and you're worried about, are they at any more risk of having MS because you have it? There's a little bit of a hereditary link, but it isn't necessarily strong. It doesn't guarantee that if you're going to pass MS on. As I say, we do not know those things under the diagnosis, how people get MS yet. But what we do know is those people who are really good at exercising throughout their lifetime are less likely of developing MS. And that is really powerful. And also this positive plastic adaptation. So all that neuroplasticity, all that ability to kind of help rewire your nervous system to really ensure that you are able to get the best out of your body, as also can happen at any point through the trajectory of having MS. So we say that the central nervous system, so the CNS, is possible, that adaptation irrespective of your disease severity. So whether you are newly diagnosed and don't feel like you've really got hardly any symptoms, or you're someone who might have been diagnosed for a really long time and your mobility might very much be confined to a wheelchair, etc., you still have the potential to change, and that is really amazing. So let's start with the fact that actually exercise is really difficult to do when you have something like MS. And I'm not sure how interactive we can make this, but I'm sure if you've got the ability to like raise a hand on the thing, that if you have experienced a bad experience with exercising with MS. So the common thing is that you're like, right, I'm going to go do some exercise, and living through your fatigue, your muscle, like all the energy you've got, you get yourself down to the gym or what it might be, And let's say you jump on the bike and you do some exercise in the gym on the bike, and then you go to get off the bike and you found that you've got a bit of blurry vision and you've got some sensation loss down one side, and you go, oh my God, what has happened? And it really puts you off. So that is what we call a symptom exacerbation. And that is due to heat sensitivity and neuromuscular fatigue. And I'll explain a lot more about them in the next few slides. But what we can understand is that when you're living with fatigue like MS, and you may have had a bad experience because of overheating, and you get these funny MS symptoms come on, like it's quite hard to then find the motivation of, is actually exercise good for you? So really, I'm hoping from today's talk that I'm going to convince you that exercise is actually amazing for you, but also give you some really practical tips of how you can ensure that you do not have this horrible bad experience that puts you off exercising. So let's start with fatigue. Fatigue is one of the biggest barriers about exercising and MS. So I like to kind of bracket fatigue into three different categories when it comes to MS. So first of all, we've got what we call cognitive fatigue. Okay, so that is because there is demyelination through your central nervous system, so in the brain and the spine. So what happens when you're trying to then get the messages, how the nerves, send a message along the nerve? If there's a demyelination point, it's like a roadblock. So how the way I explain it to people is that it's like, you've got a route to work that you drive every day, back and forth, nice and easy, nice and straightforward. That's a really direct nerve signal. And then what happens is you get some demyelination. So then that's like having roadworks on your way to work. So you can still kind of get to work, but now it's going to take you much longer, use up much more time, much more fuel. And that's kind of what's happening. So it's now with your nervous system message, what's happening, it's using up more energy to create the same outcome. And that is draining. They reckon at rest, when you're sat down reading a book, watching TV, that at rest that your brain, if you have MS, is working anywhere between 30 to 50% harder than someone who doesn't have MS. So that might be your partner or your children or your parents sat on the sofa with you. They're not experiencing how much energy is just being used up for your brain to work. There's also an actual physiological change called neuromuscular fatigue, and I'm going to explain that more on another slide. But the third one is secondary fatigue and lifestyle impacts. And these are really huge, and there is so much that can be done to improve your fatigue with lifestyle changes. Most importantly are things like diet and hydration. And I cannot stress enough how much about hydration. 80% of your body is made up of water. If you are not drinking at least 2 liters of water a day and you are dehydrated, you will be more fatigued. What we do know, unfortunately, with MS is a lot of people will have continence changes, so bladder and bowel changes, and often start restricting their hydration levels, thinking that it's going to help your bladder. It doesn't. A dehydrated bladder is actually a bladder that becomes more incontinent. So if you're going to do anything from today, if you can increase your water intake, that will start helping. But things around screen time, we know is not helping with fatigue levels. Busy lives, we're constantly on emails all the time. So there is actually lots of secondary things around lifestyle that can improve your fatigue. But to help with cognitive fatigue, there has been some really lovely evidence. We know that your brain is working harder even at rest. So if you can, the optimal is a 20-minute break in the middle of the day when you've used your brain lots already during work, etc., rather than leaving it until you crash and burn at the end of the day. Now, 20 minutes is quite a big time. So I say to people, even if you can do 5 to 10 minutes, that would be amazing. Because if you could do 5 to 10 minutes, then what you're doing is no stimulus. So no phone, no book, no, listening to the radio. It is closing your eyes. If anything, if you all you're going to think about is work, then listening to some guided meditation just to actually really switch off the brain, calm down those nerve impulses has been shown to be really beneficial. So if you know that getting motivated for exercise because you're fatigued, try having that break before you go. Okay. So heat sensitivity and neuromuscular fatigue are two of the things that can really wipe out people with MS and really change how you're able to exercise. So, starting with heat sensitivity, the majority of people with MS will be heat sensitive. Some of you won't know how heat sensitive you are because you potentially haven't got that hot or in a hot enough environment to feel it. There obviously are individuals with MS who are not heat sensitive. That is always the case, but a majority of people are. So what it means is that it's when you have an increase of body temperature by about zero point 0.5, so that's your core temperature, which is not much. You very easily, with ambient temperature, as soon as you start exercising, your core temperature increases. But also, if you have an infection or psychological stress as well, zero point 0.5 degrees is not a big increase in core temperature, which will slow down your nerve conduction speed. So, when the nerve conduction speed slows down, that is when you'll experience what we call a transient temporary symptom exacerbation. So things that you will feel, fatigue, physical and cognitive function changes, visual changes, often double or blurry vision. Your balance will be off, some sensory changes, so some numbness and some weakness. Now, some of you might get a whole range of those symptoms. Some of you might just get one or two. So it's your body showing that it's got hot. Now, you can push through this heat sensitivity, but it's probably just going to make you feel horrible. And then what happens if you've got balance issues or weakness that have been exacerbated by the heat, then you're at the risk of tripping over and hurting yourself. And that's obviously the last thing we want you to do. So, how are you going to manage this heat sensitivity? There is lots and lots of evidence about cooling. Now, actually, lots of the evidence says that you should sit in an ice bath for about 20 to 30 minutes before you exercise. Obviously, reality is this is a difference between what research can show and what is going to be reality for you. Let's say sitting in an ice bath before you exercise is probably just not going to happen because who has a spare 20 to 30 minutes? And also, who has enough ice available to put it in a bath and fill it up? I mean, you could probably go into the ocean for a bit because it's quite cold here. But clinically, the number one things that I have found to be really beneficial is drinking ice cold water. So that metal thermos bottle that's on the slides at the moment, they're amazing. If you blend a whole bunch of ice cubes up in your blender, make an ice slushy, pour that into one of those bottles, and that will stay icy cold for about 4 hours. That really icy cold is what you need because when you consume that, and that is the fastest way to drop your core temperature. And what ideally you should do is sip on that before you exercise, during, and as you recover, and that will help maintain that core temperature down. It's also fantastic if you're going to be going somewhere hot. So let's say, I mean, you might have a heat wave here in Ireland at some times, it might get over 25 or 30, but if you're going to go on a hot holiday or something, or you're going to somehow you're going to be in a hot environment, making one of those bottles up and sipping it throughout the day, also really good. The other thing that I really recommend about icing and cooling is actually ice vests. They can be really good. So if you know that you are already heat sensitive and you've had bad experiences with exercise, is you can actually buy really cheap ice vests of places like Temu, AliExpress, etc. that are just these slicker pads that fit in like a one size fits all vest. And what I get individuals at my clinic to do is I come in, I put the ice vest on. Ideally, you'd wear it for 20 minutes or 30 minutes while you're still doing all your normal tasks, while you're driving to the gym or while you're at home before you do your exercise at home. Keep it on while exercising and then take it off. They can work really well. And then if people find that those vests, if a cheap vest works for you, I mean, I think they probably cost probably 15 euros or something, the cheap ones. Then if it really works for you, there are these much more kind of custom fitted sized ones that are really designed for elite sports, much more expensive. So hence I get people to try the cheaper version before forking out for those ones. But also, when it comes to cooling, what we do know is that aerobic exercise, so that cardiovascular exercise, so things like walking, biking, and where you're doing something continuous, that is more likely to keep increasing your core temperature up. Okay. Whereas resistance training, so using weights, is much more likely to keep your core temperature level. So if you know you're really heat sensitive, my advice would be start with strength training, okay, and then we can work in the cardio aerobic. With the cardio and aerobic training, it's been shown that if you do it in intervals, that will really help to reduce the heating issues. And there's another reason why we're going to do interval training in the slide. So, neuromuscular fatigue. So heat sensitivity, we've just discussed that you do need to cool the body if you want to participate in exercise. It will make exercise much more enjoyable for you. You will not get that symptom exacerbation. The other thing is who there, I'm sure, listening at the moment has had a go at doing some exercise. Let's say you've gone out for a walk, you tried to walk for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, your foot drop comes in, your knee hyperextension, you just feel like you're dragging that leg full of concrete round with you. And then you sit down for 5 minutes, half an hour, and then you can kind of walk again for a while, but then it becomes a big concrete, difficult thing to move. So this is called neuromuscular fatigue, and it is something that can be quite unique to MS when we're looking at neurological conditions. So what it is, it's an exercise-induced or a movement-induced reduction in the ability of the muscle to keep contracting, okay, and creating that ability to move. So it basically just gets depleted. You can see on that picture there that you've got a muscle, and then the muscle's made up a lot of muscle bundles. Now, each of those bundles will have nerve supplies. Now, with MS, the nerve supply has been affected, so you won't have as many of those muscle bundles working effectively. So, probably, let's say, two-thirds of that cross section of the muscle might not be working. So, excuse me, there's a frog in my throat. So, what happens if you've got what we call partial innervation? So your demyelination has affected the nerve supply, which has affected the muscles, the muscle bundles, is that the bundles that are working great haven't been affected by that demyelination at that point. Is they're just going to run out of juice. So think about a battery. A battery only has a certain amount of life before it runs out and it's going to need to be recharged. That is what's happening with your muscles. So you start walking. For some of you, it might be 2 or 3 meters. For some of you, it might be 20 or 30 minutes. And then all of a sudden, things just start getting heavier and harder to move and less coordinated. So as I say, you just run out of juice, but it is temporary. As soon as you stop and have a rest, then the system can regenerate again. So the way we get around neuromuscular fatigue is by taking intervals. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go. But what I want you to think about with an interval is, let's say you've got an exercise bike, which is by far the best piece of equipment I would advise for anyone with MS to get, whether it's going to the gym to use it or having one at home. So let's say you've got a bike, you might do a warm up for a minute or so, you stop, you have a rest, and then what you're going to do is 30 seconds as fast as you can on the bike, and then a complete rest for 30 seconds to a minute, and then you're going to do another 30-second effort. So you might only do 4 to 5 efforts of sprinting on the bike, but some big rests. An example with walking, you might walk for 2 minutes, and then you're going to have a sit down rest, and then 2 minutes. Depending on your intervals will depend on where you are in that trajectory of your MS. But if you can interval train your exercise, then you will get such a much better experience, but also better physiological outcomes. Because if you keep pushing into neuromuscular fatigue, your body can't adapt and build muscle. It's just running out of juice. Whereas if you stop before you get fatigued, then you've got the ability to keep building muscle. So, tailoring exercise specific to MS. So, this is the bit I think was going to say, this is being recorded. So do go back over this. And I will also pass my slides on to MS Island as well. So if you get to get the slides, you can take a screenshot now of what I'm going to pull up, because this is probably everything you need to know on one page. So exercise to rest ratio, at least a 1 to 1. So what we'll say there is if you move for 2 to 3 minutes continuously, you need at least 2 to 3 minutes of being sat down, stop, and then you go again. So you're better off to be doing something with quite good vigorous movements, whether it's on the bike or, as I say, walking, and then have a complete rest. So exercise, interval train. I still have people that I work with who are half marathon running and doing mountains and stuff. I still get them to do all their training in intervals. I never encourage someone with MS to do continuous exercise. It just gets you hot and gives you neuromuscular fatigue. When it comes to strength training, this is really important. And there might be a whole bunch of you who already go to the gym, good on you, down there. And you would have been given the classic, I'm sure, probably from a physio at some point as well, 3 sets of 10. Lots of us have done that. Oh, yep, I'll do 10 to 12 reps of my bicep curl. What we actually know with MS, you are much, much better. You are going to get much better physiological gains if you drop your reps right down to 5 to 6 reps, and you're going to do anywhere between 4 to 6 sets. So you'll still get to potentially 30 reps in total, but in 5 reps, and we want them quality and heavy. So rather than getting to 10 and think, oh, I'm going to need to have a stop now, I'd rather you only got to 5 bicep curls, but they were heavier, and then you have a really good rest. Let's say classic one physios give out is things like squats or sit to stands, and people with MS will say to me, oh, I do 20 squats before I go to bed at night. And I will say, actually, I'd rather you did 5 really good squats with some weights, or even 5 squat jumps and then stop and have a rest, than try and do 20 continuously. So if you're going to do anything about your exercise from here to make it achievable, interval train, reduce your strength reps, so it's low reps, more sets, and really active cooling. So ice cold drinks are absolutely the way to go. So exercise has been shown to be disease modifying. So I'm just going to go through some of the research that is around about that at the moment. This was a lovely paper done by Douglas. This is in 2019. So it might seem a wee while ago. I'd say it's before COVID, but we've been talking about exercise and being beneficial for MS for a long time. So this is kind of a concept of where we see the evidence supporting exercise in MS. So they came up with this conceptual graph, which I just thought was just so powerful to help understand what's happening. So I'll just talk you through what we've got here. So we've got our brain volume in the white section along the top, and then the clinical disability. So we know that there's a connection, that the smaller your brain volume, so you had a really good, nice, juicy brain, and then unfortunately with demyelination, etc., and aging, brain volume can shrink. As brain volume shrinks, we know that that can have a detrimental effect on clinical disability. So obviously your ability to move around. And along the bottom, what we've got there is MRI activity, okay? And what we've got in the little arrows at the bottom, they are relapses. So if we take everything in red to start with, red at the moment is the traditional MS course. So what we can see here is that there is MRI activity, so we're having little relapses, and then we can see that along the graph, there's a big red jump up. So that is when someone's had a relapse, often when they're going to get diagnosed. So the D and the red is that they've got diagnosed. And then the tradition is, as they go along, they continue to have some relapses. There's continued MRI activity. We start to see a more significant drop in brain volume loss. and clinical disability gets worse. Okay. What we then see in the green line is people who are diagnosed at the same time. So you've had that diagnosis, but decide to change how they're living with their MS to really prioritize exercise after the diagnosis. And what we can see in the green is that there's less relapses, there is less MRI activity along the bottom, and we can see that the brain volume loss and the clinical disability can be less. And then if we go right to the blue, which is for those who are participating in exercise and vigorous exercise back from being young, their trajectory is looking so much better with even less brain volume loss and less clinical disability. So this is what we're hypothesizing is happening. So I have worked in MS for over 20 years, and I have seen many individuals along that red traditional course because I was working in MS when we didn't know that high intensity interval training was safe with MS. We didn't know how hard to push people with MS with exercise. So that traditional course where people just declined. Whereas now I can see firsthand that I am pushing people really hard with exercise, helping them to find achievable ways to exercise around the heat and the fatigue and their impairments. And I am starting to see people leading that much, much better quality of life and MRI activity staying minimal, etc. So really exciting times. In 2020, we also had a fantastic paper that was published by Caleb and colleagues, and you will just like to see the third name on the author's name on that paper is your very own Susan Coit from MS Ireland. So this consensus paper was all about finding actually how much exercise should someone with MS be doing at different points through the trajectory of MS. This is one of the best foundational papers we have to really guide clinicians and people living with MS. So I'm going to go through what they mean. So it's broken down into the EDSS scale. So I would presume most of you who are diagnosed with MS would have probably been given an EDS number at some point. But if you haven't, just so you've got a quick understanding, we're generally saying 0 to 4, 4.5 to 5, minimal disabilities. You guys are walking well. You don't really need an aid. Yes, you might well probably have some foot drop. You're probably dropping some things. Probably got a little bit of balance starting to go, but you generally don't need an aid. As we're getting from that 5.5 to 6 to 6.5, you're probably starting to use a stick for some balance, going on to maybe some crutches, and then the kind of walking frame. And then from 7, probably starting to use a wheelchair for longer distances, but shorter distances, probably on a walking frame. And then as we're going into 8, then it's definitely you are unfortunately only reliant on that wheelchair and have to be, minimal ability to get up onto your feet. So, how much exercise do you have to do? All right, take a moment. I am going to show you probably one of the most scariest tables you will have seen. Now, I obviously teach this and I show this table to people who don't have MS, lots of health professionals. I show it to GPs, neurologists, and I can guarantee that nowadays the majority of the human race are not doing enough exercise. So the amount of exercise I'm going to show you on this table is difficult for even people without a neurological condition. However, this is gold standard. What I'm showing you and giving you is the most amount of power to slow down your MS. And that is huge. But there's no point kind of going, oh, I'll do a bit of exercise here and a bit of exercise there, if you don't realize that the gold standard to really influence your MS, so that is that neuroplasticity and that remyelination, sits in this table. However, what I will say is don't get scared. It could take you 2 years to get up to the point of doing everything in this table. It takes time. So don't be put off. But what we're going to start with. So if you are fit somewhere between the 0 to the 6.5, so generally anyone who is walking with nothing up to kind of starting to use a stick, maybe a pair of crutches, etc., is 3 times a week. You should be working towards 30 minutes of exercise at about 60% of your heart rate max. So that means that you can still talk a bit, okay, have a bit of a conversation, but you're starting to really kind of have to take a few breaths, okay, a few deeper breaths in, okay. Now, though we say 30 minutes, that 30 minutes I would still be prescribing as interval based. So that could be made up as 2-minute blocks, 1-minute blocks, 5-minute blocks, etc. But working up to 3 times a week, you might be starting with 10 minutes, okay? Might be starting with 10 minutes and then building up to 30. What is the hardest part to influence, if you haven't been doing it since you left school, is what we call high intensity interval training. This is what I want you to do, is get absolutely puffing and panting out of breath. Like 90 to 100% of your heart rate max is absolutely can't get enough breath in. You should be experiencing that volume of breathlessness at least once a week. And the way you do that is with intervals. I've got there 5 30 seconds. You could be starting with 2 10-second intervals as you build up. Now, that might just be boxing, overhead boxing as hard and fast as you can for 10 seconds. No equipment needed. But so that's what we want to try and do. You can do the high intensity sessions within the 3 times a week of the aerobic, so you can mix them up. Okay. Another really important, so this is alongside doing the cardio, you need to be doing twice a week strength training. So some upper body and some lower body strength training with weights. From the age of 40, everyone is going to experience what we call sarcopenia, so the loss of muscle tissue. Unfortunately, every decade you get over 40, that loss of muscle tissue accelerates. And if you are female, it gets significantly worse, especially through menopause. So the people who should be flooding into our gyms, lifting weights, are our 60, 70, 80, 90-year-old women. And at the moment, we mostly see 20-year-old men in gyms. So we need to get that strength training. Now, this is hard. If you've not been an exerciser, I don't expect you to suddenly go down the gym and do this. You're going to need an expert to help you through this, whether that is ideally a neurophysio who's got experience with MS, or even if it's just your local personal trainer who can just gently bring you up into this. Like going bang and hitting the gym straight away after today's talk. I do not want you to get injured. However, the table doesn't stop. Hang on, team. We also need some stretching. We've got to keep you mobile. Unfortunately, spasticity can create havoc with muscle length and really affect how you move. And then we've got what we call your neuromotor. So these are your impairment-specific exercise stuff. And I'll come to that in a couple of slides' time of what that is. But this is working on your balance, might be the spasticity. This is often really your goal-based work. So when you're achieving all of that, and if your neuromotor isn't very bad or you've been working on that, you might not need to do too much on that. But if you've got a particular goal, you might need to get up to that 6 times a week, and then you might drop down to 2 or 3 times a week. But when you are doing 3 to 4 times a week of cardio and your strength training, when you're achieving that, actually the advanced aerobic is that you should be doing 5 times a week of cardio at 80% of your predicted heart rate max. So as I've mentioned, this can take a long time to get to, does involve often assistance, expert help to help you, but this is the gold standard. This is what has been shown to have the power to be disease modifying with MS. Now, if you are over 6.5, if you're at 7 and plus on the EDSS, and I know we might probably have some of you on the call today, it is quite different, but it's amazing now that we've got something really fundamental to be able to prescribe you. So the first one is a spirometer. So that is a breathing device, an incentive spirometer, where it resists your breath in, and that is going to help not only your breathing and to help get good volume and not stop you getting things like chest infections, but that breathing is all controlled by your core muscles, so strengthening your diaphragm. So it's going to help you keep better posture in the wheelchair or when standing, etc. So breathing exercises. And then upper and lower extremities, this starts getting a little bit more individual and challenging because depending on where you are at that 7+, your arms may be better than legs. You may have one arm and one leg better than the other. So we need to often explore, how are you going to do aerobic? Is that just one arm over your head boxing in the bed? Is that a hand cycle? Okay, is it something with the upper body, a ski erg from the wheelchair to work? With the lower body, is it cycling or walking? But walking might be on a treadmill and a harness. So I'm going to say it's much more likely to be cycling. But now, with those times, again, though it might say 30 to 60 minutes, I would be interval basing them, okay? Lots of shorter intervals. And the strength training, I would be doing that at 5 reps, really bringing those reps down. So, as I say, this table can look really overwhelming, but it's just showing that we need to really individually tailor some exercise to you so that you are achieving this. What I want to bring you to is the standing. Okay, lower extremities. Can you see it says standing for 30 minutes? So this is where if you cannot stand, now this can be made up of lots of 2-minute stands within the day to make your 30 minutes. But if you cannot stand for 30 minutes, or even if it's made up of lots of intervals, because it's too tiring or you're just not able, you need a standing frame. Okay. Lots and lots of evidence has been shown that if we get you up against gravity, bladder and bowel improves, bone density, spasms, length, you named it. So as people progress through the EDSS scale, the only thing that really changes on this table is that the standing part really moves into that standing frame. So to say, if you do struggle to be on your feet, the most powerful thing you can do is a standing frame. Now, there's very expensive standing frames out of there, where you might have your local therapist can try and apply to get funded ones, but there's also wooden ones that we use called the Oswald tree standing frames that aren't that difficult to make. If you've got someone really handy at home, there can be ones that made, because I know that because we can't import the cheap wooden ones into New Zealand. So I've had many clients make some of their own at home. So scary tables. However, it's really amazing just for you to hear how much exercise is needed, and it can be achieved because I work with people with MS who are achieving these and they are leading fantastic lives. So, neurological physiotherapy, this is your impairment based. They are specialized trained physios. What we're doing is assessing you as an individual because no two people with MS present the same. MS is highly individual. So we want to really personalize your prescription, support to make sure you get to that optimal potential. And what we're really good at is that we are your biggest cheerleaders. So what we're going to be looking at is, what do we need to do for cognitive training? Vestibular training is your inner ear balance, and also a lot of people with MS get plaques on their cerebellum, which is a part of your brain at the back here that controls your balance. And there's particular ways that we can work to improve that, to improve your balance. Balance is quite a complicated topic. It works on sensation and strength and all this inner ear and vestibular. So having an expert to work out exactly what parts of your balance. Gait is tricky. If you've got foot drop or knee hyperextension, we need you to see an expert because there is lots of great things that an expert in MS rehab can really help you with. As I say, strength training. If you've got weak muscles, often you are at risk of injury if you don't strength train correctly. So often getting that training. Neural drive and power training. If you're somewhere on that EDSS scale of 0 to 4, you need to be doing jump training. Power is important to keep that neural drive going. But again, sometimes you need to be instructed how is the safest way to do that. We want to work on checking your range of movement, setting you up with stretching programs if you've lost range. but also spasticity management. Spasticity management can be really difficult. There's medications out there that have quite negative side effects on how you feel generally. And there's lots of things a neurophysio can actually do to help the spasticity management before we go down the medical route. So if you've not seen a neurophysio for these issues, do go along and see one and get them checked for yourself. So just starting to wrap up. So MS Get a Head Start, it is a platform that we offer a whole bunch of services. So I provide online health professional training for health professionals, and that can be from personal trainers right through to your neurophysios, as well as the face-to-face courses that I have the pleasure of delivering here this week, which has been amazing. But we also do have a whole bunch of free resources, webinars like this on the website. There's a webinar all about heat sensitivity. So if you want to find out more about that, there's another 40-minute on there. But we do have the whole MS 6-week program for people with MS on the website as well. So it's an online program, it's self-paced. You get an email each week for 6 weeks where you get 2 exercise videos and an education video. And the education is things like the fatigue management, the exercise prescriptions, the things I've talked about today, but in much, much more detail, nearly 45 minutes on each topic. Other services, health and well-being, orthotics, where to from here. So it's got lots and lots of education. So if you're interested to know more about those things, then please head over to the website. And what I just want to bring us to an end with is exercise and rehab can work for MS at every stage. Okay. However, you do need to be really proactive about heat and fatigue management. Okay. Interval base all of your exercise. So exercise has to change specifically for people with MS. However, that doesn't mean that you can't go to a normal gym or a normal Pilates class or a normal spin session. What it just means is that when people are doing a continuous spin class, you're just going to have little frequent stops, okay, to ensure that the heat can drop down and that you don't go into that neuromuscular fatigue. And as I said at the start, we are embarking on a really exciting journey. And as I do believe, you've got the power to hopefully change the trajectory of your MS. So thank you so much for listening to this webinar. I hope you have found it beneficial. And if anything, hopefully I've inspired you to get out there tomorrow and do some more exercise. As I say, you can find much more information on the MS Get a Head Start website, and they are our contact details. But I will now open this up to questions. I think Susan's been monitoring that, so she will go crazy with it, and I'll just
and
stop.
thank you. That was really super, really digestible, really, really evidence-based information, which is really great. And just a reminder for people, if we're using the Q&A function, so if you're on your laptop, just wiggle your mouse and you'll see the little Q&A box, or if you're on your phone, if you touch your screen, you'll be able to do that. But a couple of questions coming in around interval training, which I think is definitely something that sounds sensible with heat. And a lady's asking about Tabata as a HIIT training and whether that would be suitable, but maybe with a longer rest period.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where now we get into the point of like all of you are individuals. So though I've just talked about how neuromuscular fatigue is something that's very specific with MS, your volume of fatigability will be individual to you. So though the research kind of says, a 1-to-1 rest ratio is ideal, and so Tabata or Tabata, and depending on pronunciation, basically means you exercise for a period of time and you rest for a period of time, and is you basically need to experiment a little bit with yourself. So as I say, if you are familiar with exercise and you exercise regularly, then you might do a 20 or 30 second hard effort and have a 20 or 30-second rest, and by the time you do 2 or 3 of those, if you feel good, that's great. But if you do a 20 or 30-second effort and you find after 20 or 30 seconds rest that you're not ready to go again, that you're still like, oh God, my leg's still feeling a little bit weak, then I would just have more rest. Like, how much rest you have is not a bad thing. And so it's about, as I say, it's you working out how much rest you need so that you can perform well on the next set. So if you do the next set and you're not quite as good, I would say you need some more rest. But as I
Mm.
say, if your neuromuscular fatigue is really low, you might be a runner and you might be able to run for 3 or 4 minutes continuously and then only need a minute rest for that fatigue to kind of settle again and go. So the Tabata timing stuff is really good because you can set it on phones and it can beep at you and tell you when to start and stop. But the most important thing is that you do need to listen to your body and to find out, oh yeah, do I just need to have a little bit more rest there?
Yeah, great. And it's kind of linked in with the fatigue and exercising with fatigue.
Mhm.
Somebody's saying that, they're being advised to exercise so that they can give up smoking. And it's
Mm.
how there's no energy. So how do you get started when you have a lot of fatigue? And that's a question I would get a lot.
Yeah, I think first of all, I would really actually look at your lifestyle. Like as you say, like we know that there's lots of secondary things. So can you honestly reflect and say, I drink enough water, I have really good habits around going to bed at a good time and getting up at the same time each day, and I'm fueling myself well. Food is, we need to have energy, nutritious food. So if you know you're doing those things, that's always the first things I say. Then the second thing is that we know that you will be fatigued because of that central fatigue. So I would recommend doing exercise in the start of the day. So can you do it then? But also start with the smallest amount. I always say to people, 5 minutes is better than no minutes. Like, most people set an exercise program that will probably take you about 45 minutes to do. Like if you saw me, by the time I've written it all down and I've shown you those tables and it says 30 minutes of this and, 2 times a week strength training, they're going to take 30 to 45 minutes to do probably. However, if you're starting or if you've just got a day where you're like, God, I just don't feel like it, 2 minutes. 2 minutes of something is better than no minutes. And then it's the consistency. If you can just put 2 minutes in each day and then that consistency of building on that, it will come. And so I think it's about being kind to yourself, of don't set anything too unachievable to start with, like be kind. But also think about that cognitive fatigue. Something I talk a lot about when it comes to this kind of fatigue, this MS fatigue. It's like you're wading through concrete that you're just like, it is so tough to do. But what we know about the human brain doesn't know the difference between physical fatigue and cognitive fatigue. So a good example of this is an office worker. They get up, they sit down, have breakfast, get in the car, drive to work, sit 8 hours at work, maybe 10 hours, it's a big day, sit in the car to get home, come through the front door and exhausted. Now we know that they've hardly moved, so the human body physically isn't tired. That is cognitive fatigue. And actually, the best thing they could do for their fatigue is go and do some exercise because they'll feel much better. However, if you've run a marathon or you've done significantly more exercise one day than you normally do, well, then, yeah, you probably will feel fatigued because you know you've moved your body. So sometimes it's about you being really reflective and going, God, I feel really tired. But if you haven't done any exercise, then you know that that's cognitive fatigue. And actually, if you really just try and do 2 minutes or 5 minutes of exercise, especially if it means getting outside and a bit of fresh air, you will probably actually feel better from it. And so that's always a really good thing to think about as well when you're like, oh, should I or should I not exercise? Give it a go. And if you exercise for 5 or 10 minutes and you go, actually, I'm just starting to feel worse, then stop. But I can guarantee if you know it's cognitive fatigue because you can reflect that you haven't moved that much that day, that often if you start moving for 5 or 10 minutes, you actually will feel a bit better.
There's a lovely comment that's saying you're the Australian version of me, which I think is very true because there's so much of what you're saying is what I would say, which is lovely. It's a compliment to us both.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I think another question coming about, is it if you even if you can't get to the gold standard, is it still beneficial to do some? And I think you've kind of partially answered that there in your answer about fatigue. But when you put up that slide of all the things that people can achieve and do benefit from, it's kind of, even if you did 3 cardio sessions a week, would that be enough?
I think, as I say, that table is daunting. Okay, it's daunting to everyone. So I think, and as I say, that you get a copy of that table and you show it to everyone you meet. And as I say, there's only a fine minority who probably do that volume of exercise. But as I say, that's where the evidence sits of where we think the best potential for neuroplastic changes are happening with MS. So you need to just do what is best for you at this stage, and say it could take years for you to build up to that. Because if you've not been doing strength training, even just implementing strength training twice a week could take quite some time for you to get comfortable with it and for you to just get consistent. And then you may find in a year or 2 years' time that you've been doing it so consistently that you're like, oh yeah, actually, I'm probably now ready where I could introduce something more. So I think it's that case of always um always looking for that positive, that hopeful, that I'm going to start with something that's achievable now, but I know that to get best value, I could go for something more, and see where that is. And as I say, something is better than nothing. But you know, if you truly want to manage your MS, and as I say, lots of you will be taking disease modifying medications because you're trying to manage your MS. What we're giving you is the power to manage your MS better without the negative side effects of a lot
Mm.
of those things. So it's really putting this, as I say, we're giving you the knowledge to empower you to make those decisions yourself.
Yeah. And I think we forget that this is still new. I mean, I
Mm,
know I'm not that old, but we were taught people with MS should take it easy. The first aerobic study was in 1996. That's only 30 years ago.
yeah.
So it's new. And it's interesting, somebody being told to kind of work to fatigue. And I think she's hearing your
Mm.
talk about that interval training, and that I use the expression, you can strengthen a weak muscle, but you can't strengthen a fatigued muscle, so you have to get that interval training to give that rest, and yeah, yeah. Um, I'm sorry, I'm not going to get through everybody's questions. Apology. Um, Somebody's asking about yoga and whether
Yeah.
that would be beneficial.
Yeah, well, you have to look at those. I just say like things like, yeah, no exercise is bad exercise. All exercise is good exercise. But when we're looking at things like yoga and Pilates, what I just want to highlight is that neither of them are actually true strength training. True strength training needs weights. Okay. Yoga, amazing for stretching, balance, flexibility, really good for calming your mind, breath work. Beautiful. Okay, Pilates, really good for low resistance training. So again, helps with balance, can help with coordination, breath work. Also, if you go to things like yoga and Pilates, they're often in group environments, and we know going to do things in group environments is amazing from a social perspective. Or even if
Mhm.
you're doing, I think MS Island runs a whole lots of online classes that helps make you accountable because someone's telling you what to do. You don't need to think about the exercises yourself. So all really good. But even if you're doing yoga or Pilates, I would still encourage that you might need to do some strength training as well. So I think that's my only comment on that. But as I say, all exercise is good exercise.
Yeah, and I think the strength training as well, we know that we need to be working really, really hard. And I would be always saying, and I think I like what you were saying, that 5 really good reps where you're really working to your max, it can make a difference. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, listen, Gilly, that has been absolutely amazing. I apologize I didn't get to everybody's questions, but it's been really lovely to hear what you're saying. We need to hang out more because I think we're singing off the same hymn sheet, as they say.
Yeah.
So very, very lucky to have you here in Ireland. Thank you. Thank you for doing the webinar tonight. Thank you for providing valuable education and training to our physios. So all of you, I think we've nearly 30 physios or more than 30 physios on courses with Gilly over this week. So huge inspiration to us, and hopefully a motivation to you all to get up and get active, but don't do too much too soon. Isn't that the message? Yeah. Yeah. So thank you, Gilly. Really lovely to have you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. And as I say, hopefully that's inspired you to have a little think about what you might do this week for your exercise. But good luck.